Womanjeka, everyone. Welcome to the RMIT Bachelors of Architectural Design Studio balloting presentations for Semester 1 2021, and a super big welcome to all new students. My name is Christine Phillips and I'm the coordinator of the Bachelors Design Studios.
My name is Vicky Lam. I also coordinate the Bachelor Design Studios. Firstly, we would like to acknowledge the people of the Wurrung and Burrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. As architects and designers practicing in Australia, we acknowledge that we are all designing, living and building on unceded land. We ask you all to consider how architecture can better celebrate over 60,000 years of living culture that exists within this country.
The balloting event is one of the most important events in the semester. For those of you who are new to this, Design Studio is the core subject you undertake in both the Bachelor's and the Master's programs. It is where you bring in all the skills that you acquire from your other subjects and focus on a particular design agenda for the semester. Design studios are led by venturous design practitioners, most of whom have their own practice.
At today's ballot presentation, you'll hear from each of the studio leaders. The ballot process gives you the chance to select from a diverse range of studios led by many of Melbourne's best design architects to give you a taste of the diverse and venturous design that exists within the city. Design studios are small classes of around 17 students, and you'll have 2 3-hour classes a week unless you are doing an intensive studio mode. Design studio classes are vertically integrated, meaning you'll be mixed in with other students from different levels. We encourage you to attend all your design studio classes, as you will learn as much from your peers as you would from your studio leaders. Please be mindful that most of the design studio leaders work full-time in practice, so your design studio class will be where most of your communication and feedback takes place.
This semester, we are offering you 24 design studios to select from. 18 of these will be taught face-to-face. 2 will be taught in a mixed mode, with 4 taught online to accommodate those of you who have been impacted by COVID travel restrictions. You'll be asked to nominate your 4 preferred studios through the ballot process, and you'll be allocated into one of these studios. We have a terrific range of studios being offered this semester, including studios run by some new and emerging design practitioners. Each studio will have its own dedicated Canvas page, which will be shared with you by the end of week 1.
You should now have been sent a Canvas message with a link to the ballot form. This is where you need to ballot for your preferred studios. You'll get 4 preferences, and we do our best to ensure you get one of these selections. Ballots open at the end of the session today, 5 p.m, and close at 1 p.m. tomorrow. That is Wednesday, 24th of February. So students who have not balloted by this time will be allocated into a studio. Your allocation is final and you cannot swap or request for changes.
Now, a few things to note about balloting. You will need to be logged into your RMIT OneDrive account for you to be able to submit your ballot. Log out of all of your other personal accounts. Make sure when you ballot, you check the times that the studios are being taught. Don't clash with your other classes. You'll be notified by Monday morning of week 1 as to which studio you have been allocated via RMIT My Timetable. Select carefully, as you cannot swap studios. Ballots close at 1 p.m. tomorrow, and late ballots will not be accepted. We hope you have a great semester, and we look forward to seeing all of your design work throughout the semester.
I would now like to invite the Associate Dean of Architecture and Discipline Leader, Professor Vivian Mitsogianni, to welcome you all.
Hello everyone, wherever you're watching this from. For those of you who are new, I'm Professor Vivian Mitsogianni. My title is Associate Dean and Head of Architecture at RMIT. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the people of the Wurrung and Bunwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nations, on whose unceded lands we conduct the work of the university, and respectfully acknowledge their ancestors and elders, past and present. So welcome to Semester 1 2021. If you're new to RMIT Architecture, welcome to our school. There's a separate Welcome to New Students video on the Canvas Culture portal, which is available to all students, that talks about RMIT Architecture, our values, mission, ambition, and the culture of our school. So congratulations also to all of you for getting through the 2020 global pandemic and its many, many lockdowns. It's been an incredible challenge, and I think we're all feeling knocked about by the fact that many things that we took for granted have had to pause, and that many other things that were once so very simple to do are now time-consuming and complicated. So I hope, though, that you've managed to have a break and are rested and ready to experiment and produce some interesting and meaningful projects and propositions this semester. And importantly, I hope that you're all safe and well. In terms of RMIT Architecture, there's still, of course, significant challenges ahead in terms of our ability to welcome all our students on the RMIT City campus for this semester. A number of our students are interstate or overseas, and you would have seen at the end of semester exhibition video last semester that our students are currently still all over the world, including in Cambodia, China, Japan, and of course Melbourne and Milan. So in Melbourne, of course, RMIT is subject to government advice around COVID and guidelines around our access to the campus. We're allowed 50% campus occupation in semester one. So what we've decided to do is to allocate that 50% to design studios, because that's 50% of our course. And we're going to have a mixture of both face-to-face classes on campus. In terms of design studios and online classes for the students that cannot attend campus this semester. So the studio coordinators sent out a survey so they could understand how many online classes to offer, and they'll tell you a little bit about that themselves. All other courses will be online except for major project and foundation semester, and all lectures will be online. But as we, sorry, I sent an email about that earlier on in the year. But as we did last year, we're committed to doing our best to maintain the standard and, importantly, the culture of RMIT Architecture and Urban Design. And we learnt a lot from a year of building a culture online last semester, including, how we might have some online conversations, studio crits online. This is Andre Bernice and Jean-Marie Spencer's studio crits. Patrick McAsade and Vade Tan did some fantastic experimentation using meeting up in game engines. There was quite a lot of innovation around design studio teaching in the online environment. We also captured and tried to upload through our culture portal a number of events, lectures, presentations, as well as tutorials. We do understand that a lot of our students are still struggling with technology and access to technology, and of course your tutors, if you speak to them, if you let them know what your issues are, when they occur, they will be able to assist you and assist you with the curriculum design. So please don't feel Sorry, please don't feel like if you are struggling with technology, you have to keep that to yourself. Ask for help. So a mixture of both face-to-face classes on campus and online classes for this semester until government regulations change in Melbourne and until we're able to get all our students on campus. We will shape the curriculum around where our students are and what they're able to achieve. So my role in these balloting presentation introductions is to talk to you about RMIT Architecture's culture and some of our governing principles and ambitions. It's important to remember, I suppose, that this is not just a course or a program that you're doing. It's important to remember that you're part of a community that's a local and global network. We have a range of resources locally and globally available to us through our network. And you are very much a part of that network and will continue to be after you graduate. Our mission statement that you'll see over and over again is that RMIT Architecture is interested in ideas-led, venturous design exploration that aspires to contribute to the future of a discipline and an increasingly complex world. So if we unpack that a bit, ideas-led means that we're not just making designs or propositions, but they are guided by ideas that will contribute to concepts, principles, new knowledge to the discipline, and also propositions for issues that are out there in the world. And of course, to be venturous is to experiment, to be adventurous, to try and push the discipline and the profession forward rather than merely repeating what we already know. We also say that we see design as a tool to speculate on ideas for the built environment and spatial organisation. So this is about trying to match ideas and concepts, but the medium of which we speak out into the world is by designing and through design. You can have lots of great ideas, but they may have nothing to do with a design proposition that you can deliver ideas through. The term venturous practice is a summation of our objective, characterised by the nexus between the experimental and speculative, or the realisable in practice. So while sometimes we might like to do what I might call fantasy architecture, ideally what we're trying to do is to be experimental, to be speculative, but then RMIT is characterised by the fact that we try and land that experimentation as ideas in the world, as propositions that might be realised tomorrow, in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time. Another important concept is the independence of the students. So the independence of the students to choose the design studio, to start in the bachelor's, obviously testing a whole range of ideas, and then starting to follow their own interests to particular positions in architecture. And of course the philosophy there is, if you follow your interests, if you're passionate about something, it won't feel like work. It'll be easy to spend time and to come up with ideas when you're following things that you're interested in. And of course, we want you to start to develop your voice. We don't want students that are merely copying and repeating what we do. We are very interested, obviously within the frameworks that you're given in Design Studio, for you to introduce new ideas within those frameworks. And of course, ideas and propositions. To have ideas, to then start to formulate those ideas into propositions or proposals, speculative projects that will contribute something to the world. And this idea of trying to assert your position is very important. So obviously in the foundation semester, in the bachelor's, in the lower years, you're still learning quite a lot. Your position may not necessarily be that strong. Some of you may have developed independent positions already, but certainly by the time you graduate the master's, which is the entry point into the profession, you should have slowly developed a very clear position or series of positions. And there are a number of points that we explicitly ask for you to reflect and review on a body of work and to formulate a position. So in the bachelor's, portfolio obviously is one of those points. Portfolio mimics our reflective practice PhD, where very experienced practitioners are reflecting on a body of work and then discussing the new knowledge that has come out of that work. Portfolio is a similar principle, but obviously you don't have buildings at that stage. There's a body of work that you've completed through studios, but it's important to learn the principles and how to reflect on work and start to take on new positions. And of course in the master's, the major project, you are developing an independent project with your supervisor, and that project should reflect what you're interested in. And your tutors or supervisors will obviously guide you. And I suppose these two slides are just some very old now major project proposals, but they show that from two students with two very different interests, we start to see two very different but equally successful major projects. And I think that's an important principle of the school, that we're not looking for cookie cutter students. We're not looking for the students to be all the same. Sometimes by following your own independent interests, your project will necessarily stand out because no two people have specifically the same life experience, the same interests. And of course, the cultural cycle of the semester happens through the design studio cycle, from the design studio ballot event. So when we are able to come back to campus, it obviously looks a bit like this. At the moment, it looks a bit more like the one on my right. And importantly, some of the things that bring richness to and help us develop our positions is to see how other people are addressing similar questions. And there are often symposia and events associated with studios and going on in the school. And it's really important that you participate so that you can see how others talk about architecture, how they position their work, how they have started to produce projects, and some of the dilemmas along the way. And of course, in the online environment, we have the culture portal, and we make lectures and events accessible, either publicly, and when they're not publicly available, they are on the architecture culture portal that you all have access to. The public mid-semester crits are also very important. So we advertise them, as you know, in the bachelor's and the master's, and it Students are welcome to attend, and we encourage you to attend a range of these events so you can see what's going on in other studios, see what your friends are doing, and you're able to understand what's going on in terms of the conversations and how you might participate in them, to sort of develop your ideas by seeing what other people are doing. Of course, the major project crits are also available publicly through Culture Portal and when we're on campus, in the campus. And it's important that you understand that they're publicly available for you to attend. And of course, the end of semester crits, where the work is finalised. Again, the major project ones are public crits. And importantly, the end of semester all school, all student exhibition. So this is your opportunity to talk about your ideas, obviously with your colleagues, meet and talk to the tutors. We have people from industry coming, and ideally it should be a time that we have discourse and debate in the school. Of course, last semester we introduced the online exhibition by necessity in the first instance, but it's been going spectacularly well. We had thousands and thousands of people from all over the world, I think 7,000 in the first couple of days, accessing the exhibition, which is a testament to all the students that participated. And of course, the design studios are curated around the research focus of the school. And there's a number of research foci. Our guiding principle for our research, or how we develop new knowledge, is that we do design practice research at RMIT. So we do a lot of conventional research as well, but what we're known for is researching by designing, by making projects, and research through design. And we have a number of different research clusters and a number of different processes for designing and different positions. So that is how you design perspectives about what architecture is and what should be valued comes through in the different research clusters. So we have a cluster around cities, and you'll see quite a lot of projects that focus on cities. And within the city cluster, of course, there's a range of different methodologies and processes to thinking about and looking at the city. We have a cluster around new technologies and techniques, which also includes a lot of process-based, procedural experimentation. And we have a cluster around culture and society that's around Indigenous cultural engagement, issues of identity, the poetic, and social sustainability, social issues, sustainability, and so forth. And of course, what we're trying to do is create a supportive environment in which we can create, debate, discuss, and formulate propositions. It's important to understand, I suppose, that our principle is that we all learn from each other and the culture of learning that we are immersed in. We're all working together at various levels and various stages of developing ideas. One of the important principles that I say every semester is that you need to be engaged with this culture. You need to participate, you need to be in the room, the physical or virtual room. The myth of the sole creative genius sitting at home alone trying to develop projects by themselves is just that, a myth. It's very difficult to sit alone and try and have ideas and develop projects. It's much easier if you use the culture, the tools that are available to you, if you listen to how others are presenting, sitting in a lecture, hearing an architect talk about a completely unrelated project may in fact trigger ideas for the project that you're currently doing. You start to make connections. So it makes studying, it makes producing a lot easier if you are connected to your peers, if you have discussions, and if you participate in the culture as much as you can. Here's an example, I think, a slightly misplaced slide, but it's an example of being in the room, and another example of being in another type of room. So, 2021. Well, it's going to be a little messy. Snap lockdowns at 24 hours notice will mean we need to pivot online if we have to. There's a range of unexpected things that may come up. Fingers crossed, everything is going to be great. There'll be no COVID. Everyone will get vaccinated and we'll be back on campus very soon. But it's very uncertain what the year will be like still for many of us. So we understand that, and in situations like this, it's communication that is very, very important. We need to talk to each other and keep each other informed, and we need to let each other know if we need more information. The other thing that's important is trust. That is, we hope that you will trust that we are doing our best and let us know if something needs to be improved. And we will listen to you and trust that you are doing your best, and we'll try and assist you as best we can to continue to produce fantastic work in the course. It's also important to remember that we want you to succeed in this course. We want you to have a transformative student experience when you are at RMIT Architecture. And we want you to have a very positive experience. So if what I've said today doesn't match your experience, it's very important that you let us know. You can feed back to us through your tutor, your course coordinator and program manager or head of program, the course experience survey, and the student staff consultative committee. And also touch base through RMIT Connect on other issues. It's also very important that you ask for help when you're struggling with something, or if there's something that you don't understand in one of your courses. And of course, your tutor, course coordinator, head of program are places to ask for assistance. And there are some fantastic support services on the RMIT Architecture Student Central page for a whole range of support services at RMIT. And of course, the program manager is the go-to support person for any program related questions or support. So that's it from me. I'll leave you with this slide, and I hope you have a fantastic semester. I look forward to seeing all your projects halfway through the semester and, of course, at the end of semester exhibition. Bye for now.
Hi everyone, yes, I'm Leanne Zilker and I'm the electives coordinator for the Bachelor and Master's electives. I was also exchange coordinator, but Richard Black has taken this role, so he will brief you either today or later on during semester. So just to briefly talk about electives, you should have already received a link with the link to the issue, set of posters, and also the balloting link. Unlike studio, electives are only described in the posters, including the schedule. So it's really important that you read these very carefully. You understand the type of work. You understand also if it's bachelor or master's only. This semester, we really have only one, the PRE, which is for master's students only, and that has quite a range of practices involved this semester. I'm coordinating that while Helen Duong is on leave. So the process is that you read the electives, understand the timetabling, and then select in the balloting link 5 options from that range. All 5 are considered equal. There are no change of mind, changes to your elective. The elective that you're placed in is the one that you should be doing. We hope to have the list finalised by Friday for posting into the timetable by Monday morning. Just to note, this semester all electives are online except for some workshop use for advanced fabrication workshops and so forth. Just to reiterate that they are actually all online, unless it says specifically in the posters, but essentially the PRE is face-to-face and the fabrication electives are also face-to-face. So all the rest are online. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I look forward to seeing you during the semester.
Hi, welcome to RASCO. We're excited to share this brand new student club for those studying architecture and urban design.
It has been made for students by students to help create a new close-knit community within the hub and far away.
Our aim is to provide students with organised social events, give transparent career pathways to demystify the industry, and assist and support studying students in these intensive degrees.
We are hoping to plan a number of new and exciting events this year, from casual get-togethers to formal professional events. There is something for everyone to be involved with.
If you head to our website, you will find links to video tutorials, sample of student work, and a button at the bottom to sign up as a RASCO member, which is free.
If you're an architecture and urban design student, scan this QR code to sign up now, be involved, and a member of this new, vibrant community.
Hi everybody, I'm going to be presenting SOFT, which is my Bachelor of Architecture Design Studio for Semester 1, 2021. This is an online studio, so we'll be meeting Monday and Thursday, 2:30 to 5:30 online, and I've had a whole year to get my online skills up and happening, so this will be a really fantastic studio. My name, of course, is Leanne Zilker, and I guess I am an architect, and I'm also an academic here at RMIT. The work and the studios and my design teaching come out of a long fascination with floppy materials. It's summarised in a recent publication which This was titled Floppy Logic, and it was about the experimentation, the territory between architecture and fashion and textiles. So my fascination is with the sensibilities of fabrics, with these range of materials that have been, in soft furnishings, and that's about it. But there are a lot of beautiful qualities in fabrics in relation to fashion and textiles that I have always believed have a real application to architecture. And this application looks at what are these qualities. So there's intricacy, there's lightweightness, there's the interesting relationship between structure, form and skin, where they tend to merge. And so these things, I think there's a lot that architecture can really learn from. The pleat pod, which some of you may have seen on level 9, is an example of how the idea of a pleat as opposed to a fold can be used to develop an integrated structure, form, skin and enclosure architecture. It also allows to explore these terms even more, such that we get a kind of joyful and kind of very expressive type of architecture. It even extends to thinking about soft prefabricated items such as the shirt as a construction unit, as you would a brick or a column. When you look at the techniques from fashion and textile design, you are able to increase the scale of them to the scale of architecture, and just that increase in scale is quite a tremendous road of investigation. It also introduces us to fashion and textile fabrication, where they have the ability to produce large-scale items bigger than garments, and how this might impact the development of fabrication in architecture. This is part of an installation that will happen at the NGV as part of Sampling the Future. So what is the studio about then? This studio is really trying to delve into what soft means for architecture. What are the formal relationships that come up when we're dealing with soft things? How can we develop an understanding between structure, form, skin and material when looking at soft specifically? What are the spatial opportunities? How can the soft forms be realised in terms of construction? And how can soft be explored and applied to buildings and the creation of space? So by definition, soft means lacking firmness or strength and is weak. It is a counterintuitive term when discussing architecture that really is required to be robust, firm and structurally sound, and hence is always considered, the materials are always considered in that kind of conceptual setup. But dealing with soft and dealing with the ideas of soft allow us to be freer with the kind of forms and spaces that we can develop. So when you do start thinking about soft, you do tend to decouple from the kind of architectural assumptions that we usually make related to concrete and steel and these kind of conventional ideas. So it does allow us to think about things such as very lightweight, very intricate, and lots of material. So it only seems natural to me that we look at the disciplines that excel when dealing with soft materials. And fashion and textiles is one of them. This is a very simple example of the kind of embedded innovation within fashion and textile design, Issey Miyake, who has a textile designer always working in parallel, and you've got a very lightweight material, but then just sent through a kind of pleating process becomes a much more structural piece of material. Comme des Garçons or Ray Kawakubo, again obsessed with form. Similar things that architects are also obsessed with, and layering of material and developing techniques that exaggerate the body. Even acknowledging that fabric has a life of its own and that it needs to be just simply fixed in critical moments for all the structure to actually perform. We look at the work of Iris van Herpen, and you can see that this is much more architectural, less free-form. So the pleats have been restricted to a kind of framework so that they remain the same the whole time. And we also know in fashion and textiles that there is a lot of illusion. As with architecture, things are not always as they seem. So on the outside, we see these beautiful garments that have been buttoned and tied, but little do we know that underneath there is a whole set of structural corsetry happening to ensure that the form is articulated with the movement of the body. Some more of these beautiful ideas. So again, lots and lots of structure, but very, very fine structure. So when scaling up, that is a big issue when it comes to softness or floppiness. Christo did this with fabric wrapped around the Reichstag, and what it does is articulate the form of the Reichstag, detracting from the detail. So it allows us for a new perspective on the shape of the building. There are other ways that architects have looked at softness, and that is the embedding technology within fibres to create a very lightweight idea. Again, more illusion, so draping, the idea of draping a new roof over an existing marketplace in Barcelona. But of course, this is really quite significant steelwork, ceramic tile, not soft materials, but generated from the soft. And there are also architects who develop, such as Sol Il, around soft materials and frameworks. So again, more structure, but very lightweight. Tensile, we're all used to seeing, and how fabric can be controlled through tension. And then we've got knitted tubes. Again, this is similar to the work I'm interested in, where the knitting machine is used as a construction manufacturing tool. Other artists also dealing with a direct translation between architecture and fabrics. And then the most extreme example of this with training of silkworms to cover a form. So they are just some of the ideas and some of the things that we'll be looking at, and I'm constantly asking questions around what is soft architecture, what does it mean, what is it good for? So some of the past studios that I've run that have started with, I think, the Floppy Logic range of studios, and now is heading into a soft range, which does rely heavily on digital experimentation. So we learn a whole lot of tools, we muck around with tools. This is this is not a kind of studio that is going to teach one type of set of digital technique, but lots, and I rely very heavily on the generosity of the studio to really experiment, just as you would if you were making a model with random materials. In this way, we really pick up whatever plugins that we can get our hands on. Of course, I will guide you through this as well. So again, you can see through the kind of free use of these digital tools that you can develop an idea around structure, form and skin, and intricacy and how the two are related. Looking at form and looking at how when you introduce structure and how you introduce space and how you introduce urban context, what happens to the material ideas, the relationship between materials, and the relationship between structure and skin. Inflating, the idea of inflation, how this might interact with an existing form. And that's about it. So I really look forward. I'm totally excited about meeting you all. And I think this is going to be a really fantastic studio. So I look forward to seeing you online.
Transforming cultural contexts into architectural semiotics for a known building type. This studio is titled Knowing the Uncanny. A definition of the word uncanny: strange or mysterious, especially in an unsettling way. I am your tutor speaking. My name is Jan van Skyke. I am a practicing architect at MVS Architects, a creative and cultural industries strategist at Future Tense, and a researcher and senior lecturer at RMIT Architecture and Urban Design. This studio will be conducted via a virtual classroom, online, using Zoom so we can see each other, and concept board so we can look at each other's work and edit it while we're working on it. Here's a picture of what that looks like. An out-of-class study group will also be established, where students discuss the studio skills and architecture with each other outside of class time, and I won't be there. Learning and production will follow a weekly work schedule, which I'll talk about a bit more in a moment. Progress will be presented and discussed in twice weekly classes. Each online class will start with a warm-up exercise and some stretches to get our energy up and in the mood for teaching and learning. And a full costume online karaoke event will be held prior to mid-semester to bring us all closer together through a bit of embarrassment, and also to hone our professional presentation skills. What is the agenda of the studio? To practice architectural thinking through the design of abstract models, to learn from existing projects by redrawing them, to transform abstract architectural models into drawings and images that make sense in the built environment, and to design for both recent and ancient local histories and cultures. What will you learn? You will learn about urban and architectural form making, 3D modelling techniques, evolving a design by incremental iterative change over time, designing and drawing in section, the grammar of architectural cultural expression, how to borrow from examples, collage as a design technique, and presentation and performance skills. In week 1, we will do exercises, stretches, introductions, go over the work schedule in detail and the study group schedule in detail. We will look at the reading list and look at examples of uncanny abstract architectural models. We will discuss drawing techniques and learn how to use concept board. In week 2, we will make a cultural context collage, investigating local cultural demographics, recent geological history, and ancient and contemporary local Indigenous cultural stories. We will then generate an intricate, detailed collage combining our understanding of these 3 things. In week 3, we will transform our cultural context collages into an uncanny, abstract, 3-dimensional model in virtual space. In week 4, Uncanny Alchemy Round 2, we will develop and add to our cultural context collages in an uncanny abstract three-dimensional model in virtual space based on group discussion and feedback. This is how we evolve the project. And in week 5, we will further develop and add to our cultural context collages, transforming them further on their route to becoming uncanny abstract three-dimensional models in virtual space, again based on group discussion and feedback, and we will then finalise that uncanny abstract architectural model. In week 6, we will prepare an interim online exhibition. We will learn and practice presentation and performance techniques in karaoke format. In week 7, we will have our mid-semester reviews, where we will present an online exhibition in a live stream presentation to an external audience and invited industry professionals and other academics from RMIT. In week 8, we will study and redraw plans and sections of a prescribed existing building. These will be library and cultural centres, which is the building type that we will be working with. In week 9, we will visit the site in person if out of lockdown, or using Google Street View and Near Map if not. The address is 41 to 55 Albert Street, Footscray, Victoria 3032. We'll then reconfigure our uncanny abstract architectural model so that it fits on the site and takes into account the adjacent built environment and context. We will then transform our volumes of our uncanny abstract architectural models into an interior, a basement, a roof design, a street frontage, and 3 rear frontages, designing from the corners outwards. In week 10, uncanny transformation, we will cut a series of plans, sections and elevations through our building and manipulate them using an existing building type drawing as a tool. In week 11, we will manipulate and coordinate our facades, volumes and drawings into a coordinated set of architectural presentation drawings and images and present them for discussion. In week 12, we will manipulate and coordinate our facades, volumes and drawings into a coordinated set of architectural presentation drawings and images. It's the same thing again, but this is how we develop and get better and improve the work incrementally week by week. In week 13, we will design an online exhibition and prepare our presentations, and we will practice our presentations. And in week 14, we will present our uncanny abstract architectural models and our coordinated architectural proposal in a live streamed online presentation to an external audience and invited industry professionals and other academics from RMIT. In week 5, we will design our folios. Your contribution to the studio will be transformative of the studio and of yourself and of your proposals to the built environment. The studio has a robust teaching and learning process within tight parameters. Your own contribution within these parameters will be distinct from this process. It is your contribution that will define the studio. Through your efforts, you will make a direct positive contribution to the built fabric and architectural culture of this city, Melbourne. I look forward to meeting you and discovering your contribution to the studio. Please put the studio high on your preference list. Thank you.
I recently read a quote by architect Mark Rackett, where he rather sanguinely declared that he doesn't moisturise, not consciously, but that it just doesn't occur to him to do so. I've never been so terrified by an answer. Maybe this is something of a camp one-liner to immediately introduce the idea that sort of wraps itself around this studio, of our conscious attitude to death. Maybe I've just had too long to think about recent events, cornered, as we all were, in our domesticity, moving between a screen and a phone and a window. Death corners us. It is what holds us upright, our back against a wall. It does not offer an escape. It is certain and confident and indescribable. I don't remember the first time I was terrified, not as a child, but there was a moment reading Thomas Mann's Bunburybrooks, a novel carried forward by the demise of a wealthy merchant family, that caught me out as a young adult. In a later chapter, the sickly Hanno, the young son and musical prodigy of the protagonist Thomas, and last heir to the dynasty, sits alone in the salon in front of a piano he pretends to play. Over several pages, Mann describes the emotive feeling of the music Hanno hears as his fingers are prevented from touching the piano. A restless flood of sound adventures, rhythms, harmonies, welling up uncontrolled from the keyboard. At the conclusion of this imaginary concerto, Hanno retires pale to the chaise lounge in the corner of the room. The next chapter is a description of the epidemiology of typhoid and a patient's attempt to escape their illness through any means before it is clear to them that they will die. In the final chapter, we learn that Thomas has died from exhaustion and that Hanno, his sexual interest in men only just beginning to appear, take ill with typhoid and dies, leaving the family with no heir and a future of destitution and death. In my apartment in Collingwood is a background viewed by far too many in camera of art and objects and stuff. But the angle doesn't take in all aspects to the left, right, or behind the lens. Some things just stay out of view. I stayed out of view when I received a call that my twin brother lay in hospital. I stayed out of view when I could not return home to New Zealand. I stayed out of view when I discussed the brain damage he had sustained. I stayed out of view when I withdrew my brother's life support. I stayed out of view when his friend read the eulogy on my behalf. And I stayed out of view for some time after, much to Anton's disgust. The studio's prior, Froth and Foam, and Grand Delusions, extending to Maggie and Babylon and reaching to the last studio, have been about loss and departure and a confrontation with its otherness. They are born of personal narratives of my grandfather or Peter or Maggie or the last dying moments of a studio. And this studio, Anton, is founded through my isolation, wrapped in isolation, in my withdrawing into that which has already been withdrawn from view. It is the consequence of it all that I'm most interested in. The studio occupies the courtyard of the U House, designed by Toyo Ito for his then recently widowed sister and her daughters. After 21 years, the house was demolished. It was never intended to exist forever, but was only connected to a purposeful and deliberate withdrawal. Like the Edmund and Corrigan office from prior studios and now completely left in ruin, I am not interested in the house or in Ito. The house is what furnishes our imagination with a life. Perhaps something about this studio mirrors watching Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, with the scathing performances of Liz Taylor and Richard Burton, who draw an unsuspecting couple into their alcohol-fueled reverie. The film is 2 hours of pure cruelty that descends into a Walpurgis night of self-loathing and the unbelievable death of their imaginary son. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Big bad wolf. Big bad wolf. Who's afraid of the big bad wolf? Big bad wolf. Big bad wolf.
Hi, I'm Paul Dash.
And I'm Jane Dash.
And our studio is called Vax. In this studio, we're interested in investigating contemporary cultural narratives around vaccination through the design of a biomedical research institute building. This studio is part of an ongoing series of studios that we've run over the last 5 years that have all got in common some themes around investigating large-scale urban design proposals and also an interest in cultural issues and their relationship to architecture.
We're interested in investigating systems outside architecture and bring them into the design process to see how they might inform the design outcomes that we're looking for.
This is an example from a studio that we ran last year called Sacred View, which was the design of the Anzac metro station underneath the Shrine of Remembrance. but which also brought in narratives around the shrine and the idea of collective memory and what a memorial should mean.
Our projects, or the students' projects, start off looking at the urban site, the context, and this is work that was done in North Fitzroy last year. So that's the starting point. Through a number of small exercises and reviews, students go through a process of analysis to see what they're interested in, what would they'd like to take forward into the final project. And then a process of design is investigated to generate the building form for the final outcome. The projects that we look at are large-scale precinct projects. Students do this work in groups where they look at different ways of developing the site under their narrative. Then students go on to develop up their own building individually, although other students in their group will influence their outcomes. The projects range from large scale through to internal views to substantiate the ideas that they're bringing into their design work. We're interested in the ideas around urban space, meeting space, public space versus private space, and how this is developed through the flow of the buildings. Buildings often frame and speak back to the context in which they're developed. Students are allowed to develop their buildings and sites through their narratives to add program, to develop their location further and interact with the urban context. We develop up some views initially at mid-semester and continue to work on them to develop them through the rest of the semester. We encourage students to engage with their initial research in their final building so that the buildings and the folios can be read as a complete narrative from beginning to end. And students often work feeding off each other's projects when developing their individual buildings at the end. We're interested in appropriated space and how space can change hands between public and private ownership. We're interested in introducing ordering devices of how we can connect urban spaces into the buildings.
The site for this project is within what's called the Melbourne Biomedical Precinct, which is a cluster of related research and treatment facilities that's to the north of the city. That includes Melbourne University, a range of private institutes, research institutes, and the hospital, all of the hospital precinct. It includes sort of adjacent to Royal Park. These are all of the main facilities that are part of the institute, and also includes CSL, which is one of the biggest vaccine manufacturing pharmaceutical companies in the country. The interesting thing about this precinct is its adjacency to the CBD, and it's kind of at an inflection point when where the CBD grid sort of skews towards the suburban grid, and so it's got some interesting urban potential around that skewed grid. And it's also got the adjacency to both to the CBD and to Melbourne University and the hospital precinct as well. And this is the actual site called Elizabeth North, which has been the subject of a number of propositional institute buildings over the last couple of years, and is, you know, really well located for this type of project. We're also going to look at some precedent projects which are, I guess, characterised by taking something from the research, from the science, and bringing it into the building design. So, you know, the VCCC and the Melbourne Brain Centre being two examples, as well as a suite of other institute research buildings?
So as far as the project goes, we're going to start off small scale, and students will look at the design of a small transportable vaccine clinic. Students will end up designing their own buildings, and in between, students will work in groups to develop a precinct approach to the site that we're looking at that's quite large. We're also going to look further into other ways of presenting information and architecture, and we think that infographics could be a way of exploring representations other than what's normally seen in sort of architectural presentations. So that's VAX. We're running Monday and Thursdays, 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. We're small to large scale, and the tutors are Jane Dash and Paul Dash.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Christine Phillips and I'm a non-Indigenous architect and full-time lecturer at RMIT.
Hi everyone, I'm Stesinos Mansis. I'm a non-Indigenous architect and a session staff member at RMIT. Our studio is called On Country Framlingham, and it is the third iteration of this studio. It is a studio with a real client, and we will be working on a live project.
We live in a country made up of hundreds of many different distinct Indigenous land groups, each with its own culture, customs and laws. Today, many of these language groups, cultures and traditions live on in new ways. Yet, contemporary Australian architecture has struggled to engage with its First Nations peoples, cultures and histories. So within our design studios, there's a strong emphasis on the figurative that fits into a particular trajectory of Melbourne architecture that is narrative focused. We are invested in how architecture might embrace these Indigenous cultures and traditions, drawing on a range of different sources to generate an architecture imbued with ideas and stories.
The studio came about from an invitation we received from this great man, Uncle Leonard Clark, a well-respected Aboriginal elder from the Western Districts of Victoria. Lenny has a vision for the beautiful 200 hectare of Aboriginal-owned land and invites you to use your talent and creativity to visualise his idea.
Lenny's vision is to offer a world-class music venue for local and international music performances, attracting large and diverse audiences to the rich cultural heritage of the Western District of Victoria, to provide a welcoming education hub that supports socially disadvantaged Aboriginal youth, and to offer large and flexible spaces within the hub for a range of specialist services that can address the treatment of young people with drug and alcohol addictions.
So this studio will be directly engaged with a real client for a live project. And here is the site, located near the former Framingham Aboriginal Mission, around 3-hour drive from Melbourne. So
depending on COVID restrictions, we hope to run a 2 to 3 day field trip, which will cost around $200, depending on how many of you have a car. You'll need a tent and a sleeping bag, so we can camp on country with Uncle Lenny and the Krawarong community. There will be lots of yarning and designing on country with other activities throughout the semester, including watching films, visit to exhibitions, museums, lectures, and other field trips.
And in terms of production, you'll be making lots of very quick models and drawings and photomontages in the earlier parts of the semester as a design tool where you will be working both in groups and individually. We take a collective approach to teaching where you will be expected to critique each other's work together to achieve the best outcome you can. The studio will be structured into the following: individual and collaborative group bi-weekly esquisses, a mid-semester project drawing from your earlier design research work, development of final proposal working in pairs. So there'll be a lot of group work in this semester. Classes will be held Mondays 6 to 9 p.m. and Thursdays 2 to 5 p.m.
And to finish off, we would like to share with you some work produced from our past students who worked with Uncle Lenny on this site, Kieran Merriman and Emma Croker. Thank you all very much, and we look forward to meeting you all very soon, face to face in the Design Hub. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Hi everyone, my name is Anna Yankovic. I'm a Lecturer Industry Fellow here at the School of Architecture and Urban Design, RMIT, and a Practicing Architect Director at Simula. This studio follows in a series of studios that I've led over the past 6 years, and like those before it, it seeks to investigate forgotten histories and to recover and pursue provocative ideas and ideals. This studio is titled 23 February 2046, and it is the non-identical twin to last semester studio titled 23 February 2021. Before his death in 2004, artist Mutlu Cherkes had developed a system for dating his artworks where he included a future date in the artwork's title to indicate when he would remake it in the future, although not necessarily in its original form. He questioned how value is attributed to particular art genres above others and the categorization of artworks as being minor or major. He also challenged the idea whether a work of art should be resolved or complete, or being of a singular point in time. In this way, Cherkes disrupted the conventional linear timeline, both of individual works and his art practice as a whole. All works were considered of equal significance. Similarly, this studio will not look at buildings or architecture as a static object or being just of its time, but rather one that is accretive and in a constant state of flux, one that will be changed, adapted, preserved, and rebuilt over time. The Isagran shrine pictured here is rebuilt every 20 years as part of the Shinto belief of death and renewal of nature and of the impermanence of all things. The rebuilding of the new shrine takes place on a site adjacent to the old, and each rebuilding alternates between the two sites. When the time comes to rebuild, the old sanctuary will function as a model for the newly constructed shrine. The original was naturally a copy of a previous model. Every 20 years in this cyclical process, a startling moment occurs when the new shrine is already built and the old shrine has not been dismantled yet. At this moment, two shrines exist, identical and at the same time not identical, two copies and two originals, revealing what we desperately try to erase in Western culture, that is the passage of time. Here, Joseph Gandy's rendering of Johnstone's Bank of England shows it as an overgrown ruin. The cutaway aerial perspective provides a view to what the building might look like in 100 or 1,000 years' time. But it can also be said that it represents both a state of new and of decay. It is in tension between emerging and eroding form. This studio seeks to further ideas of the unbuilt or deconstruction, in progress, reconstruction, and rebuilt, that is perpetually incomplete. Mutlu Cherkes questioned many of the mythologies of art, including the necessity of an artwork to be original or unique. And in his series of works titled New Album Covers for Designs of Bootleg Recordings of Led Zeppelin, Cherkes spoke of his discovery of these bootleg recordings of Led Zeppelin concerts. The band were known for performing their songs differently at every concert, and Cherkes studied the variations between each of them. The nature of bootlegs meant that copyrights were never considered, and so the same title would reappear over and over and repackaged over and over. As he says, bootlegger, bootlegged, bootlegger. The subjective and the analytical are intimately linked here in this consideration of time's progress. Like Cherkes's own remakes, or de Chirico's self-forgeries of his own early paintings, students will make and remake. The project work will be formed through a series of esquisses in the first half of the semester that will then be remade in the second half of the semester to amass into an assemblage of architectural parts. This means the architecture is not a singular object. The architecture is forever incomplete and evolving. Students will need to choose between their original works or their remade works in the formation of their final project. In previous studios, students studied the perceived differences in two major periods in Western art and architecture, given their influence that still permeates today. Here are two copies of David, one by Michelangelo and the other by Bernini. Similar to Cherkes's critique of the need to categorize and periodize an artist's work, this investigation was also a critique of the common separation of these two approaches into two distinct periods of thought. In this studio, students will investigate one approach for their originals and need to reconsider alternative ways of seeing and thinking architecture when they remake. As part of this, students will explore a collection of elements that comprise a building and its different modes of habitation. And through the accumulation of these elements, the architecture project remains in progress. Each task will look at an intense refinement of architectural expression through the odd assemblage of familiar objects. Each remake of an object will be an invention or reinvention that looks to the object's inherent DNA, its history, and its utility. As a series of works, each task will be composed as a triptych of digital craft, history, and architectural elements. Alongside this, students will be given a collection of readings and a series of conceptual art and architectural references, and, where available, films, lectures, and other media that considers these ideas and other contemporary concerns. Some tasks throughout the semester may be linked to a specific tool or software, which you'll be introduced to along the way. Will be Monday 6 till 9 p.m. and Thursdays 2:30 till 5:30 p.m. The studio will be structured in two halves across the semester. The first half of the semester will see students work both individually and in pairs to focus on the research and development of a set of works and design strategies. These will involve specific processes to generate elements, programmatic adjacencies, circulation, composition, and complex spatial geometry. Following mid-semester, students will then work individually to rework and amass a menagerie of project work by the close of the semester. The project program will comprise of a fabrication lab and student hub located on a site in Melbourne's CBD. Students will need to consider the suitability of their formal outcomes against the scale of the site and the program and the contextual considerations of each of their inventions. Outcomes will be communicated through diagrams, drawings, renders, and formalised with digital models. You can also check out some of the work from last semester studio via our exhibition website, 23february2021.studio. As the title suggests, 23 February 2046 is the date that the studio will be remade. Till then, I look forward to seeing you for semester 1, 2021.
Hi, my name's Richard Black. I'm offering a studio titled Upside Down Country this semester. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Dja Dja Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. This studio is going to be based upon the gold rush of the 19th century in central Victoria, and more particularly on sites in and around the town of Castlemaine, about 110 k's northwest of central Melbourne. The studio is premised upon a campaign at the moment to try and win UNESCO World Heritage listing for many of these gold rush sites that are scattered across rural Victoria. The project is for a visitor centre which provides a sort of gateway, a destination in which to seek information about those sites before going out into those landscapes and experiencing them. The project's going to be based on the edge of Castlemaine. More importantly, one of the key things will be looking at land as a more complex, culturally loaded idea, which has also social and political implications. And I'm particularly interested in how these things begin to motivate how you act, the sorts of things that you do in the place of Castlemaine with all of these things in mind. So the site you can see here, this is probably the 1880s, sitting between the road and the creek bed on the left. An aerial view of that same image. And this is what it looks like today. The river is now channeled between these two embankments. Cutting across the side is also another piece of infrastructure, the Goldfields track, which pulls together a walking track that connects many of those potential World Heritage listed sites. So the purpose of the building are the bits of landscape elements that you'll be designing, possibly similar typologies to some of these examples, such as the Shipwreck Lookout in Homebush Bay in Sydney, or perhaps the Rowanbow by House Rooker, allowing people to look in a particular way in relationship to the city, or Room 11's Gasp, centre on the edges of the Derwent River in Hobart, speaking to its industrial heritage. What do you choose to look at? What interpretations of the past do you begin to build in your work? This is a work that I produced with an artist, John Young, several years ago, speaking to the cultural contribution of the Chinese people who came to the Victorian gold rush in the 1850s around Ballarat. And it speaks very much to a sort of cross-cultural pollination that emerged from various indigenous and local settler communities and the Chinese culture at the time. As does the work by Janet Lawrence and Fiona Foley, also using text and material samples of place to build stories and narratives of an archaeology of place. So the studio will be structured in the first part by looking very carefully at some of these sites and landscapes through various drawing techniques, cataloguing and mapping. You'll be exposed to some artistic practices that use various media to do these sorts of things, as well as writings and texts. Perhaps there will be collections made, things curated from the site, drawings made that speak of place. The ground itself will be our site in which to embed and rest and mark. The second part of the semester will be a more resolved architectural project responding to the brief and some of the more conceptual issues of the studio. My interest in curating your relationship to this site material is to build ways in which you use that to motivate the architectural pieces that emerge, strategies that bridge site knowledge and how you act, how you intervene. The typology of garden will be something that's used as a way of holding together all of the complexity of the studio. The garden is significant in the sense of something in the past that's held together architecture and landscape, nature and culture, and ideas about nature, really big ideas about place and nature. So we'll be looking at the garden as a particular typology to work from that can hold and make present all of your ideas and bring them into a more coherent, legible urban intervention into the edge of Castlemaine. Many of the sites and landscapes around Castlemaine have these sorts of fragments in them as remains, redirecting creek beds to provide resources to drive much of the goldfields infrastructure. And then in parallel, the damage that some of those interventions made on the local ecology. So there'll be interesting tension between the various readings, perhaps, of the historical event of the gold rush, environmental degradation, and some quite spectacular bits of infrastructure that were left behind. There'll be many bits of writing and case studies that will allow you access into much of the complexity that I've been talking about, a lot of the content around land and place. By the end of the semester, what I'll be looking at in each of your works is a piece of architecture that is a little bit indistinguishable, perhaps, between the landscape and what is architecture, what yields to the site. Perhaps bits of architecture yielding to the ground and bits of ground yielding to the architecture, where both become partly indistinguishable. How will your work pull distant landscapes into the near, into the present? So I look forward to meeting you in week 1 of the semester. I'll be running studios on Monday evenings, Thursday afternoons. It'll be mixed mode, online on Thursdays and face-to-face on Mondays with a site visit in week 1. I'll see you in the first week. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Brent Allpress, and I'm offering the Alter Studio for Liverpool. It's a studio that looks at practices of alteration, extension and addition, and it looks at the prescriptions against those practices in modernism. And it asks you to pick a canonical and characteristic modernist project from 1900 through to 1975 and to design an alteration to that project in order to work through those complexities. It's an architecture brief about architecture. You'll be designing an Institute of Architectural Design Research that has an architectural archive, permanent and temporary exhibition spaces, a discourse space or auditoria, workshop spaces, and a design in residence. It's loosely based on the Seinfeld episode, where Kramer proposes a coffee table book on coffee tables. This is architecture about architecture. What you're dealing with here is a kind of drive in modernism towards autonomy. These buildings don't want to be touched. They tend to be standalone. It draws on a reductive model and a drive towards autonomy. And so that's a key aspect of modernism. There's another aspect of modernism you can trace back to people like Piranesi that deals with an additive and hybrid model and looks to create new spaces through those sorts of juxtapositions, style, context and elements. There are a limited body of work within the 20th century that were alterations. Asplin's Gothenburg Town Hall with its sort of ghosting of the neoclassical building and its hinging within the interior. Jimmy Watson similarly framing up Robin Boyd framing up the building as an abstract volume, and yet it's three different buildings that are knitted together with voids that connect. Mies, very few buildings in his body of work, they're almost all autonomous except for this interesting collection of alterations. Mies did an alteration to an existing neoclassical building, and then did an alteration to himself. And so you get this very, very interesting interstitial space and offset and juxtaposition between the different strata of his own work. Le Corbusier, rooftop apartment. Surrealist project on the roof. Very strange juxtapositions within the interiors. The lineage for alterations as a body of work in terms of practice, you have to go back to John Soane. Partly comes out of Piranesi's lineage and neoclassicism. John Soane Museum, extraordinary project. We'll look at a whole range of strategies you could draw from that sort of practice, juxtapose it with the kind of drive towards urban autonomy that you get in people like Le Corbusier, the literal application of the tabula rasa, the demolition of the city in order to create a kind of autonomous urban space. But within Le Corbusier's body of work, there is this juxtaposition between semi-autonomous systems, and that liberative drive that's there in modernism is one of the things I think is interesting to engage with. It tends to be a semi-autonomous relationship between systems within an autonomous zone. It doesn't tend to let otherness in, and it doesn't tend to extend out beyond itself. So I think that's one of the possibilities for the studio. You can find some instances within Le Corbusier's body of work where there's a kind of base block condition that he does a series of alterations to, particularly in his later work like La Tourette, and that gets picked up on by people like Haydock subsequently. And there's parallel work, people like Eileen Gray, where the entire architecture of her own house down in the Riviera is all about performative elements. It's not about autonomy, it's a relational architecture. And it's interestingly one of the only instances where Corb's done an alteration to an existing project with his unsolicited murals. So there's a bit of interesting biographical and gendered history to deal with in those sorts of projects. If you look at Le Corbusier's larger work, he saw that work as being a kind of a frame that could allow for a range of different sorts of insertions for mutability, for alterability, for adaptation. So within this is a kind of, one of the economies for this is adaptive reuse. Now that's actually a sustainability question, and it's an economic question, it's a cultural question. When buildings reach their use-by date, what do you do? There's a lot of embodied energy. So that's an ethical question in practice that needs to be engaged with. There's precedent within work after Corb of looking at event spaces that are adaptable by definition. Cedric Price, for instance, in the Fun Palace. And there's some applied archigram that deals with alterations to existing contexts through events that are brought in, that contaminate that space, that give it infrastructure, and that leave that transformed so that it forms a network of relations. And there's a bit of built sort of work informed by that with Peter Cook's more recent Kunsthaus in Graz, which is actually an alteration project. Again, more of archigrams ad nox for dealing with a kind of high street condition and a kit of parts. So there's a kind of range of different sort of precedent we may look at that deals with these. Mostly we're looking at the kind of buildings that set themselves up even though they may have a kind of free set of relationships within themselves, they set themselves apart, like Mies van der Rohe. And then there's sort of mythologies around modernism. Philip Johnson's a key one. He worked with Mies, and he's worked with a number of people. Philip Johnson set up a fascist party in the 1930s, and he went in with the Nazi troops into Poland, and he designed his own uniforms. He set up a hit list. They had their own logo, and this is his first design for a sort of far-right platform for Father Coughlin in Chicago in the 30s, and his own famous glass house is inspired by a reverie he had when he was with the invading troops in Poland, and looking at burnt-out farmhouses where only the charred remains of the frame and the fireplace were left. So these sorts of modernist projects are open to all sorts of readings that are social and political and economic and gendered, and will be open to all of those. Again, key body of work that you'd have to look at in terms of precedent for alterations is Carla Scarpa's work. Almost all alterations at a range of scales, scalable practices, and then more recently so from the mid-70s onwards, you find a shift. So Ian Pei's work in the Louvre. Peter Corrigan describes Frank Gehry's alterations to his house as the point where the addition hit the fan. And I think that's a pretty good description. Great example of modest context, very high architectural values, excisions and subtractions and alterations and additions that reframe the house and its relationship. And we'll look at a whole range of different precedent for counter-compositional practices, working with and across and against existing contexts, and how that might be a way of developing different schema, different sorts of strategies, contemporary strategies for setting up semi-autonomous relationships between different strata in a work, and how that might create a sort of more complex whole. And then there's a kind of interesting lineage in Melbourne that I think is significant culturally and in terms of our practice history, that almost all the key practices engaged in their early work and then in subsequent larger work with alteration. So Howard Raggett's AITSIS project, which is a series of alterations, their very early large Story Hall project, the urban sort of application of their strategies with the Hamer Hall and the Arts Centre, and the opportunistic alterations to the Shrine of Remembrance that reframe that project. And then there are a whole range of other practices that have different genres of ways of tackling that, from Peter Elliott and John Wardle through to Kirsten Thompson and others, coming out of a Lovell Ched lineage with an interest in Scarpa. And then there's the kind of crossovers between art practice and architecture and installation practice through modernism and through the 20th century. So Kurt Schwitter's Meersbau, the Gordon Matter Clark's kind of violent interventions into existing contexts, the exquisite kind of curation of offset voids in Chieta's work, in the bar sculptor trade as an architect, and more locally the kind of parasitic work that our colleague Richard Goodwin explores in Sydney, when his interrogations of the autonomous tower project. And there's our Richard. So this is a studio where you can choose a body of work to do a deep dive. Now you're all working on a common brief, but on different sites. You're developing design strategies and a range of practices across the scales. I encourage you to have a look at previous iterations and past exhibitions. Same studio framework, always different and diverse content. Thanks very much.
Design Studio Forming Complexity was founded by Nick Bell and Hassan Mohammed in 2019. The studio has been running for 2 years at RMIT University Architecture School. Nick and Hassam are both registered architects in Australia and PhD researchers in architectural engineering technology. Forming Complexity is a design studio in the territory among digital fabrication, algorithm design, materiality, additive manufacturing, and the structural optimization of complex forms. This studio aims to explore advanced architectural design and tectonic implications of carbon high-tech composite systems, accompanied by new fabrication techniques such as 3D printing and robotic fabrication in the architectural context. Now robotic fabrication and 3D printing are rapidly changing the feasibility of constructing geometric structure with a high degree of intricacy. Therefore, emerging architectural design approaches that leverage the capacity of algorithmic design and digital fabrication methods such as robotic fabrication and 3D printing are able to create a highly intricate built architecture in the near future, especially in the city of China. Through a series of generative design form finding, a number of designs will be proposed to achieve exceptional architectural qualities such as complex formal expressions, interesting spatial qualities, and innovative digital fabrication methods. The studio will explore a series of architectural components and building systems to reimagine architectural style influenced by the implication of robotic fabrication and high-tech composite materials in other industries such as aerospace and automotive, which have transformed the culture and approach towards design and fabrication in these industries for many years. Students will design a series of architectural components and building systems to reimagine architectural style. The new design proposals for the future city will accommodate fabrication constraints as well as aesthetical qualities and planning consideration through developing and testing new intelligent design methods and new construction techniques.
classical world was understood as one of rational purity that spoke to the greatness of the West. The men of the Renaissance saw these ruined Greek monuments and read into them a scientific, mathematical, emotional truth. Our progenitor, the basis of all good things. For it led us here to this moment, so it must be good and true and right. Right?
In the beginning is hermeneutics, but the shared necessity of exegesis. The interpretive imperative is interpreted differently by the rabbi and the poet. The difference between the horizon of the original text and the exegetic writing makes the difference between the rabbi and the poet irreducible. The original opening of interpretation essentially signifies that there will always be rabbis and poets, and two different interpretations of interpretation.
Hi, I'm Dale Schlosser. I currently work at NH Architecture, which is a large commercial firm in the city. Alongside teaching Lowell Pool, I've also been leading a few practice-based research electives for RMIT.
And I'm Michael Strack, also a graduate at NH of a few years now. Prior to teaching in Lower Pool, I've taught in an Upper Pool studio led by Dean Boothroyd. Dale and I have been teaching together for the last couple of semesters.
So, this studio focuses on a particular interest Michael and I share in urban form, which is the analysis of the urban qualities of Melbourne and the relationship of these things to architecture. The theme that this studio will investigate is what in our city contributes to an overall sense of blank propriety, and how within this does deviance and difference still flourish. This includes such concepts as the interiority of the block, the duplicity of the facade, the multiple natures of the city, the authored and the unauthored, discontinuity, anonymity, and the cryptic nature of the cities we live in. The city exists in a state of contradiction. There's the turbulent, spiritual, personal interior realm, which opposes the shared but neutral, disengaged and anonymous public realm. Really and most simply, inside and outside.
Outside, the studio sees the huddle grid as the thin, grey territory of our city. A uniform realm of bluestone wherein a palatable but perhaps uninteresting overall image of our city is formed. The grid structures our city. It enforces a base level of neutrality, of accessibility, of collectivity. But also, block by block, the grid holds the conflicting desires, dreams, and inner spaces of our city apart, allowing them to coexist, but also rendering them disconnected and inert. This grid binds our city together at the very same time it allows it to become fragmented and discontinuous. Our city is a series of internally focused island fortresses bound by asphalt. And so, we look within. Building on and refining the previous semester's work done in Archipelago, the studio doesn't seek to apply moral judgment to this fragmentation of our city, but instead we seek to work with it. Our city may be ruthlessly divided, but within each division we see variation and we see difference, the interior of each city block beginning to develop on its own terms. We see the isolated block as a generator of difference in our city. Removed from the social contract of the surrounding streetscape, the block's interior is free to pursue its own agenda without the restrictions imposed by the propriety of our city's thoroughfares. In unrelated chaos, complicated interiors develop, each their own idea of the city. As a broken mirror casts 1,000 reflections, so our city is equally composed of 1,000 interiors, each unique in its distortion of the world around it. In this manner, our city is not just one, but many. The city of the interior is also chameleonic. The interior block seeks to take on qualities of the city around it in order to legitimize its own place in the urban realm. The interior takes on notions of perfect continuity, of endlessness, a supernatural level of choice, wild swings between the monumental and the intricate, and attempts to contain as much variance somehow as the natural world itself. Equally often the interior seeks to define itself away from the city through duplicitous facades, plans oriented against the grid, a disorienting lack of legibility, and positions for top-hatted doormen guarding the entrance. As such, the studio proposes an artificial naturalism of the city around us, in order to locate conventions, happenings, and strategies of the city that can be taken and exaggerated, or alternatively outright rejected. The studio hopes to treat the city as a found object, to be mined for its spatial qualities.
So, the specific social context of our studio focuses on the ongoing conversion of granular city blocks into interiorized megablocks, complexes that are unplugged from the grid and rely only upon themselves. The site of this studio for the final time will be I.M. Pei and Batesmart and McCutcheon's Collins Place. The first significant megablock in Melbourne, a ruthless, high modern complex which decidedly turns its back to the city, attempting to prove its own logic and order superior to the grid that surrounds it. It emulates and copies the city in small gestures and quirks, attempting to allure passers-by with familiar moments stolen from the grid. The site forms the basis of the studio's exercises. The studio's design tasks will reveal aspects of how the site and the city interact. The complex will be cut, bent, pierced, opened, sampled, turned into a landscape, rearranged, and found as a bath. You will also be asked to turn to the city around you, locating strategies, decisions, and problems which can be applied to your own projects. You will ask what position your project takes. You will ponder the way it interacts with the city. What do you embrace? What do you reject, unveil, exaggerate? What do you fix? What do you ruin? These findings will then create a library of parts that you can rely on throughout the semester. From a series of smaller exercises, you will go on to design a cinema, a type which is at once urban and interior, anonymous and collective, concrete and chimerical. We will make extensive use of Rhino, along with rendering tools such as V-Ray, Octane, and etc. Work is to be initially undertaken in groups, then individually. Our studio runs 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. on Mondays and Thursdays, and we look forward to seeing you then.
Hello, my name is Todd de Hoog. I'm an alumni of Curtin University and RMIT and director of the Emerging Architecture Studio SSDH. I've previously taught at RMIT in the first year program and in Bachelor studios with Richard Black and Melissa Bright. In this semester, I will be running a studio called Marl. The Melbourne Airport rail line proposal has a long history, beginning in 1958, alongside the design and construction of the Melbourne International Airport at Tullamarine. Its development spans multiple schemes, feasibility reports, and proposed travel routes. It has been part of international studies on new rail technology conducted in France, has been the flagship project for better or worse of multiple governments, and led to property speculations and land acquisitions that have shaped the growth of our city and outer suburbs. Having historically chosen to prioritise the Tullamarine Freeway with its traffic, roadworks, and skybus to define the visitor's first impressions, Melbourne has finally committed to opening a rail line connecting the airport to CBD by 2029. With the construction of the new rail line, Melbourne now has an opportunity to create a new gateway to the city along the length of the rail corridor. Through the design of the route, landmarks, infrastructure, stations, and even the cars themselves, we have the opportunity to curate an entrance and define the narrative that we wish to portray to visitors and those returning home. In this studio, we will be investigating past and current proposals for the Melbourne Airport Rail Link and the multiple design opportunities that this rail corridor provides as the new gateway to Melbourne. Our semester will be broken down into a number of studies and interventions along the mile. The studios will vary in scale, function and program, but will all focus on how this new large-scale infrastructure project could be used to define or redefine civic identity and how this translates into built form. We will begin by using large-scale mapping and generative drawings to represent and understand the history of the mile proposals, its context and existing transport routes. These mappings will not be static representations, but hierarchical, detailed and critical drawings used to develop a design language and project agenda. Mapping and drawing exercises will be followed up with a series of writing tasks. Along with other texts, we will be borrowing from the style of Calvino and we'll be exploring how different frames can be used to define a city and how personal experience can change our understanding and projection of places, as well as be a driver for architecture. With a preliminary understanding of site, context and agenda developed through mapping and writing tasks, we will then begin to develop a series of interventions along the mile. These will take the form of a landmark, replacing the gateway created by DCM's Melbourne International Gateway, an overlap or intersection, be it a tunnel or bridge with an existing urban or landscape condition, roads, rail lines, rivers, suburbs, etc. A train station representing not just a stopping point in the journey from airport to CBD, but also a potential locus for a new urban growth zone, an opportunity to consider both a local station context and its relation to the broader city. An interior, a new train car offering a frame through which to view the city and previous studies and interventions, as well as itself being part of the broader narrative being established and an opportunity to explore these ideas at a smaller human scale. And the rail corridor itself, linking all interventions into a singular gateway to Melbourne. We will approach design through layering and refining existing urban conditions, history, context, and subjective experience. There will be no tabula rasa. We will be developing our own narrative, agenda, and design language that responds to and works within complexities of the existing urban fabric. We will be highlighting how large urban planning and infrastructure projects not only have the ability to increase urban utility, but define civic identity. There will be research, reading, writing, and a lot of drawing. Studios will be held on Monday afternoons and Thursday evenings at the times listed on the poster. I look forward to getting started and hope you all have a great semester. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Evans. This studio is called The Anti-Institution. Institutions, prisons, boarding schools and asylums. While these buildings were once considered essential facilities for society, they have also left a legacy of segregation and physical division within our communities. The architectural typology of institutions is based on control, surveillance and segregation of individuals, which often produce detrimental environments for those housed within. This resulted in the closure of many institutional buildings, such as asylums, in the latter half of the 20th century. Today, the status of these institutions has changed. However, the buildings are still with us. This studio will explore the following question. How can architecture today resist the embedded social values of segregation? This studio is based on the grounds of a former Kew lunatic asylum. Students will look to subvert the typology of the institution, reappropriating the old asylum building as a community centre. This site is located above the banks of the Yarra River. The new facility will provide a generous public building and public grounds for the local community. The Anti-Institution looks at designing a community centre with a focus on accessible and equitable architecture, where accessible elements and programs are integral and expressive parts of the architecture itself. The studio's key areas of investigation will include 1. Typology. Engaging with the typology of the asylum as a leverage to inform design proposals which address the polar opposite social and political values. 2. Adaptation. Adaptive reuse of the former Kew Lunatic Asylum. 3, the grounds. Design of the grounds surrounding the former asylum will be as important as the building itself. And 4, architectural language. Testing and exploring the arrangement and scale of architectural elements, materiality, spatial qualities, ornamentation, and form. Typology. In this studio, we will look at different types of institutional architecture to gain an understanding of its use as a means for surveillance, power, and segregation. As a starting point, the studio will analyse the E-shaped plan of the Kew Lunatic Asylum as a base for student design proposals. Boasting its lengthy batwing-style floor plan, the psychiatrist Thomas Story Kirkbride designed an ideal building plan for mental asylums, several of which were constructed in the latter half of the 20th century. Kirkbride's theory was to cure the mentally ill with fresh air and natural light. Albeit well-intentioned in principle, Kirkbride's plan was also based around the principle of segregation and surveillance. The former New Jersey State Lunatic Asylum was the first of the Kirkbride buildings to be realised. The linear plan of the Bethlehem Royal Hospital, Jeremy Bentham's radial plan, the Panopticon, and the Otto Wagner's Pavilion Master Plan will also be explored in this studio. Through the analysis of the plan, the elevations and the elements of the institution, students will gain an understanding of asylum architecture as a means for surveillance, power, and segregation. Students will look at critically reshuffling and reappropriating these elements and ideas of asylums to give them new meanings. Adaptation. This studio is interested in understanding the importance of heritage and history when faced with a new program in an outdated building typology. We will form strong positions on the juxtaposition of heritage and adaptive reuse. We will explore techniques of minor intervention and major intervention, while looking at successful community architecture that promotes equality and accessibility. The grounds. This studio is not only concerned with the architecture of the building, but also the architecture of the grounds. This studio will look at how the external environment can bleed into the architecture and vice versa to create interesting, inviting public spaces and buildings. Through the analysis of precedent studies, we will test master planning techniques, understanding how you may begin to break up the site and position program. Projects such as this, Karakawa and Jin's Site for Reversible Destiny, and this, Tatiana Bilbao's Botanical Gardens, will teach us how to alter the ground plane and create different spatial qualities in a landscape. Ideas about objects in space and site connections will be explored through relevant texts. Environmental, social, political, and historical aspects of the site will also be explored to inform design proposals. Architectural language. Students will test experiential, physical, and formal spatial qualities through experimentation with the arrangement and scale of architectural elements. We will look at distorting the scale of architectural elements. We will also look at architecture that is an expression of its internal spaces. And where the architecture becomes an expression of the external ground. In the first half of the semester, there'll be a series of group projects. However, the final project will be individual. The studio will take place on Mondays and Thursdays from 2 to 5. Thanks very much. See you next week.
Hello, my name's Enza Angelucci and I am the tutor for Urban Generosity Design Strategies for an Architectural Livability. It's a small to large scale studio run Monday and Thursday nights between 6 to 9 p.m. and the teaching model will be face-to-face. The following are a series of slides that I hope will evoke some sense of what this studio is, student works, some precedent works, and some of our office works. So I've developed this studio as part of my practice-based research and as part of my postgrad studies here at RMIT. It's based on an understanding of what is and how we can authenticate the local, and in doing so, creating an architecture of livability, or what I've termed urban generosity. I've developed a series of design strategies to investigate and develop an urban surplus through architectural form. So what is urban generosity? I argue that architecture clothes the culture of the city, and in turn, architecture prompts the city's imagination and has a profound impact on civic amenity. The proliferation of human activity in our cities has given rise to the nature of cities as a place of exchange and surplus, a place of urban generosity. So this studio is an exploration of how we can develop a series of architectonic outcomes to encourage this civic surplus. This studio commences through observation of the local and to define the architectural nature of place in which the architectural outcome is to be housed. Through a series of group and individual esquisses, the studio will become a process of discovery in how architecture can extend beyond the object place paradigm into a place of civic surplus. How do we design architecture for people? The studio will concentrate on 3 specific architectural design strategies: the edge condition, porosity, and nature correctiveness, to design a medium housing proposal located in North Fitzroy. So I'll now go into depth into these 3 design strategies and tell you what they are. So for example, if we talk about the edge condition, what are these conditions? So the edge condition is the breaking down of the boundary, the layering of anticipated thresholds that blur the expectation of interior and exterior paradigms, the spilling forth of life, of human activity that ultimately delights in its complexities, the opportunities to watch and be watched, the production of an urban village, creating urban spaces that allows the body and space to loiter, delight, wonder, and authenticate the environment in which it is experienced. The edge condition through tectonic devices is an intentional weaving of form and program of the existing and proposed structures. We'll look at the adaptable edge, which allows the occupier to appropriate the edge of the built form and engage in the immediate context through devices such as operable walls, interchangeable skins, contraction, expansion of the space. We'll look at the electronic edge, that allows a skin to transform, delighting the city in its variations. It creates change and movement on a 2-dimensional interface. The undulated edge creates varied movements along the edge of the building interface, creating an enhanced and varied experience of the immediate context. The edges of existing proposed buildings are extended vertically and horizontally to exchange, capture, or expose the context and histories of that local context. The heritage edge reviews the historical skin and its meaning within its context, known as its streetscape. It adapts this heritage onto a new surface. The layered edge has a series of thresholds that blurs the lines between private, semi-private, and public space. The seasonal edge changes according to the seasons. The design's pointed departures from the natural elements on the site and allows the occupier a haptic experience of context. We'll look at porosity, which is the filtration of light, air, and views, movement and program. Like the human body, architecture is a porous vessel that accommodates the visceral matrix of life. The built form allows nature to filter and adapt the perceived static nature of architecture. It facilitates a flow between environments, enabling architecture as a process of exchange. The porous terrain engages the site and existing topography through the various edge conditions of the local context. The porous fabric is the material strata that allows the opportunity for exchange between the occupier and the built form. Porous views is the insertion of apertures in built fabric that allows a series of views at any given point beyond the building envelope. The porous climate allows for the filtration of air and light through the built form, engaging in spatial exchange with natural elements. Nature correctness is a term to describe a process of how architecture connects to nature. It is a process of engaging sunlight, views and air, and greenscapes into the design. Not only a process of sustainability, but also a process of delight. It is an understanding of how the integration of our natural environment can sustain our built environment. So through a series of these small scale investigations, both as individuals and groups, students will develop the proposed medium housing brief and program. In this studio, you'll develop a body of work that takes you through a process-based design that explores the opportunities architecture and its context can give and be given by the immediate community inhabits. We will review mid-20th century medium housing typologies to explore the development of our urban conditions and how we can unpack these conditions to develop housing cells that encompass and future sustained livability within urban contexts. We will explore the development of how life and form are intrinsically linked and how we can develop this through the opportunities and possibilities of two elements coexisting. It is argued that we as architects create our own existence, and in turn our cities create us. It is a cyclical and symbiotic relationship. The nature of our cities create who we become. We will investigate biophilic design and how architecture develops a connection to nature and the impact that this has on our physiological well-being and our sustainable world. We will develop historical examples of urban conditions that highlight 20th century architectonic devices that enables a continued connection to nature through built form by reviewing the works of Charles Landry, William Wright, Jan Gale and Jane Jacobs. We'll begin to unpack their successes and or failures to understand how these housing models can be utilised now and into the future. I look forward to another cohort of future architects who will be interested in discovering the nature of architectural form and how this can sustain our urban livability. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kerry. I'm an architect in Melbourne. I studied architecture at RMIT and have taught studios in both the Bachelor's and Master's program here at RMIT.
My name's Zach. I'm a recent graduate of RMIT, and Kerry and I met in our Bachelor's several years ago now, and we're running this studio titled Cabinet.
The idea of Cabinet came out of a recent project that Zach and I completed in South Yarra, adjacent to Robin Boyd's Domain Tower. And we were far more interested in Robin Boyd's Tower than the project itself initially. And we used this idea of the city and the context of the city to generate a intimate interior for our project that literally scaled down Robin Boyd's Domain Road Tower into interior, which kind of cemented this idea of our kind of interest in the city.
So the studio Cabinet will continue this lineage of thinking in kind of the analogies between city and interior and building and city, and we'll draw on those ideas to form, which will kind of dictate weekly exercises that students will be tasked. These exercises will be accumulated and collected and reflected upon and stored in each student's cabinet.
The studio is structured in weekly exercises. Students will be given a weekly task sheet with readings, site outings, drawing references, and all these precedents will lead into a design esquisse each week, which will then be collected and kind of put into their own cabinet of curiosities.
We're interested in the city, particularly Melbourne and its history as a modern city. we're interested in kind of the underlying frameworks that have sort of corralled the city into what we know as today. We're interested in Harry Norris, who was an architect that was prolific during the war, the interwar period, where his office built a number of buildings that have kind of transcended generations of use, and their use has largely remained relevant. These buildings have been, that have adapted throughout the decades to form a productive piece of architecture in the city today. They also, whilst they're quite beautiful as individual objects, the qualities of these buildings kind of are a reflection of the city themselves.
Now, two other architects that are city thinkers are Aldo Rossi and Rem Koolhaas, and why we're interested in these two architects is the tension that lies between the theories of these, two theorists of the city. On one side, we have Aldo Rossi, who's of the poetic ilk. On the other side, we have Rem Koolhaas, which is about this idea of the generic city and the way in which scale impacts on the function of the city. So we're interested in function, but we're also interested in this idea of the poetic and the memory of the city.
In investigating the city, we're interested in teaching how one observes moments of the city and catalogues these moments. So they could be, things that we find interesting. Photography is an important role in documenting found spaces or objects, and the way that Bert and Hilda Becker, for example, catalogue their work. It's quite regimented. It's very objective in the way the subject is represented, and it's very rigorous. And we're interested in this form of documentation and cataloguing of the city as a research tool.
We'll be looking at local and international exemplars of building and architecture from Edmund and Corrigan. This great example of architecture is their Athen House. Moving across the globe to architects such as Sigurd Leverance, Aldo Rossi, of course, Caruso St. John in London, and the way they shift in scale. So on the left-hand side, we've got a recent work, which is a large-scale gallery. On the right-hand side, a small residence. But both architectures carry a similar attitude, and that attitude, in our minds, is a reading of the city. Florian Beagle, and while the scale of this piece of architecture on the left of the screen is quite small, we believe it kind of punches above its weight, and it's a scale that the studio is interested in, and the outcome will most probably be a scale of this sort. While small, it carries a lot of ideas.
Drawing for us will inform an integral part of the studio. We're interested in drawings at the scale of a door, next to drawings at the scale of a sort of master plan. And we're interested in the way these are both drawn, but also how they communicate ideas in quite a rational and legible way.
We're quite passionate about the power of drawing and how we as architects produce drawings to convey ideas, the way in which we use colour to compose a facade or a plan, the way kind of the study of shadow and skiography gives depth to a drawing, and we start to design with this in thought, the way section or a corner section starts to be used as a design tool rather than a post-rationalized piece of communication is quite fascinating for the studio and us. We like rendering, but we like rendering with thought and intent. These two drawings by Edmund Corrigan carry an atmosphere that computer alone cannot generate. It needs the ideas behind it. I guess the attitude of the studio is it's the ideas that hurt.
We're particularly interested in both in the relationship between the city and the interior, and the way that interiors are drawn and the detail that goes into interiors, just as much that goes into the city. We're interested in making models, and making models will form quite a crucial part in the way that space is both read or designed. So these models won't only be presentation models, they'll also be quite, they might be maquettes or working dog models that will help us understand project.
This is a drawing that some of my students produced last semester on one of the outings they were prescribed. We had them go to a local Vietnamese restaurant in Northcote, and they were tasked in drawing the ritual of their meal as a group, and this drawing was 6A0s large, and the students, from what I can see, had quite a bit of fun on this outing, and that's also important to the studios. We like students to have fun and actually be excited about their weekly tasks. So it's not only about producing drawings and models, but also, if possible, being able to go out and learn a bit about the city and their peers. These are some examples of my past studios, so you can get an understanding of the scale. We're looking at small buildings. We're looking at small buildings that carry a lot of thought and detail.
The studio we run on Monday and Thursday evenings from 6:30 till 9:30. There will be some group work in probably the first half of the semester, which will kind of transgress to individual projects for the final.
We hope you like our studio, and good luck. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Imogen and I'll be running the studio Farms, Burbs, Nature and Things. This studio will encourage students to think about architecture beyond the envelope of the building and its immediate landscape elements. It will seek to highlight the interconnectedness of our built environment with natural systems, both immediate and territorial. The studio will show a role for architects as integral to the development of ideas and realised strategies combining these complex built and natural systems to adapt to a changing world and mitigate the effects of these changes. You will test unconventional combinations of programs, aiming to produce provocative ideas for cross-programmed buildings and spaces, arguing that by hyper-varied use, a building can be sustainable long-term through efficiency and spatial innovation and flexibility. How people live, work, learn and play in suburban spaces will be questioned, with propositions being intrinsically linked with the natural systems around them. The studio will encourage highly service-oriented and infrastructural buildings juxtaposed against expanded and rehabilitated landscapes. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to show you some work from students who undertook previous studios with myself and Mauro Baracco in both the bachelor's and master's programs, along with some images from other built and unbuilt precedents. The studios and precedents have very similar themes to those which we'll look at through this studio. You'll notice some of the studios were on sites overseas. The contexts, though very different, face similar pressures to those faced in our own city of Melbourne. The graphic representations throughout will give you an idea of the types of drawings we'll be working to in this studio. Our site will be in Sunshine North between the Maribyrnong River and Cororoy Creek. Your projects will be a series of architectural interventions throughout the site that will combine with some leftover existing to make just one structure. Your architecture will house everything from homes to shops to schools, research facilities to aged care homes, restaurants, electrical infrastructures to water supplies, and the one use that will continue to link this building together will be farming. High density, high yield, highly controlled farming, not a few microgreens for a bougie cafe. We'll look at this new built suburb alongside the ground plane. For every program that we place into this architecture, we free up some of our ground. The programmatic and infrastructural needs of the city will be within one form while the ground will be released. Back to water, back to inhabitants, back to flora and fauna, and through this, we will suggest the rehabilitation of this portion of Earth, our city, our suburbs. A highly infrastructural built world rising above and surrounded by a thriving revegetated landscape. We will bring Richard Brautigan's poem to life. I like to think of a cybernetic ecology where we are free of our labours, joined back to nature and all watched over by machines of loving grace. We will start by looking at the site in minute detail. We will draw and map everything, in particular the ground, its varying elevation, the direction of water flow, the vegetation, the composition of surfaces. We will map use, activities, and time. We draw and map to begin to more deeply understand our site's native and built ecologies. We will look at precedents ranging from the metabolists to landscape architects like Bureau B&B and architects like Avalos Heredos, from writers like Richard Brautigan to scientists like Alain Bombard. We will take cues from each of them to combine design intent, infrastructural organisation, philosophies, ideas, to reform them in our time in this place. As the semester progresses, we will move through specific design esquisses to bring us to your proposals for our new suburbanism. Your final proposals will show your building and regenerated ground at 3 distinct scales. Zoomed right out to see the greater context of the city, how your proposal might replicate and begin to reshape the suburbs. We'll then zoom back in and look at moments of how many and contrasting programs will work in spaces combined, how your built structure will sit in tension with the landscape, and in again to see what it will feel like to inhabit these programmatically diverse spaces, both built and now rehabilitated landscape, and how we negotiate the combining of public, private, and shared. You will complete some work in pairs, and on 2 separate occasions you'll coordinate as a whole class group to piggyback off of each other's skills, share your ideas, and maximise your efficiency. The rest and majority will be individual work, including both your mid-semester and final presentations. In this studio, we will look for projects that are contextual, infrastructural, performative, and opportunistic, rather than expressive, iconic, symbolic, or metaphorical. The projects will establish relationships in tension with their immediate and territorial contexts, rather than produce isolated and individual interventions. Your project won't just be about us working out how to combine suburb and farm. There will be a chance for us architects to communicate change to our industry and the community beyond. Through suggesting an architecture for more efficient life, we should suggest the life of a city transformed, a suburb sustained, and the life in our landscape rehabilitated. Thank you.
Reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me because, as we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know.
The home itself feels like a body, a living entity capable of comforting and nurturing its inhabitants. Like us, this entity is one among many others, linked through infrastructure and labor to the systems necessary for its survival. While we think of the home as an isolated unit, the workings of the house body demonstrate our interdependence.
This is a studio that investigates dwellings. Specifically, as a point of convergence between the congested infrastructures that comprise our reality. In this studio we refuse to see dwellings as isolated entities, to be shaped by an omnipotent designer, rather we direct our suspicions towards the other agents that author our city and the private home. For architects, the term infrastructures may suggest plumbing systems, electrical grids, air conditioning, transportation networks, and other physical city matter. However, in this studio we will unfold these archetypes with what Keller Easterling describes as the rules governing the space of everyday life. Invisible systems of management, design standards, and legislation, political consensus and dispute, social etiquettes and behaviors, data and information, news and media, manufacturing and commerce, these are infrastructural components that fabricate and condition our reality. As these layers of our world grow increasingly congested, our city is becoming more controlled and predictable, yet somehow more incoherent. We live in a complex and inhuman assemblage of things, and we need a circuit breaker. We need a way to push past what is obvious, move against the grain, and expose things we may not be able to see due to our assumption that everything is working. To do this, we will fabricate conspiracy theories. Students will work as conspirators, gathering evidence of invisible relationships in the city. Its ulterior motives, its shadowy plots, and its nonsensical rituals will be the field of survey. Conspiratorial thinking will be used to connect the brick to the precinct, objects to ideologies, and science to madness. Your work will parallel the theory fiction of Reza Negarastani, China Miéville and Thomas Moynihan. These authors take uncontroversial phenomena and arrange them in unique ways, divining patterns and assigning motivations and causal relationships amid an inscrutable world. Your work will move from fiction to everyday experience, producing real effects, and arriving at a kind of hyperstition, where your ideas crystallize into realities. Your potentially absurd theories will approach upon fact. Supporting and structuring your conspiracy theories, you will build ongoing indexes of sometimes tenuous connections between your own work, the work of other students, the city, and other influences. You will constantly be collecting, curating, and connecting. This frenetic, hyperconnective mode of thinking will be applied to the architectural site. You will approach a site in suburban Melbourne in the manner of forensic architecture, documenting and recording the site in a way that captures more than what is typically of interest to architects. Any piece of evidence, no matter how minuscule or tenuous, might be the key. At the center of your manic survey, you will situate your project. The dizzying multiplicity of the city will then be framed through the singularity of the dwelling. To begin, you will design a dwelling that embodies your position on exactly that, the dwelling as an idea. Then gradually, your dwelling will react with more and more material and immaterial layers of the city, leaving you with an assemblage that embodies your position on the city itself. Rather than allowing the forces that shape our lives to remain nebulous and abstract, we will address them through architecture, head-on. As you familiarize yourself with the mechanisms of the city, you will react to your conspiracy theory through your dwelling. But what will you do? Will you solve something, ameliorate something, nurture something? Or will you exacerbate your theory, bury it deeper, unearth something, unhinge something? While it can be a place of comfort, the home can also be an agent of the uncanny or a vessel for the paranoid. It could be a sanctuary from the outside world, or a base from which to mount resistance. What other uses there may be for the dwelling, we will leave to you. Projects will be produced in a spectrum between what some might delaminate as real and speculative, but we are always willing to confuse the two. From Lebus Woods, to 3144. De Volder-Vinktyer to Wes Jones. Brandel Huber to Michael Sorkin. Philip Dujarda to NMBW. Diller Scofidio to Balls and Wilson. We are interested in the way these architectures have clear conduits to their sub-architectural matter, and their extra-architectural matter. For your final project, you will produce a short documentary. Through this you will explain the conjecture and connections you have developed through your work. Where a drawing can present numerous object relationships concurrently, the documentary strings them along in a linear fashion, emphasizing chronological adjacency and juxtaposition. We're interested in how this format might present dwelling under a continuum. Every week in this studio, you will be watching film. You will be reading. You will be writing and publishing. You will be gathering evidence. At times you will work with others. But you will mostly work alone.
So what connections did you make?
From France to the Philippines, from Jamaica to Japan, from Malaysia to Mexico, from Sri Lanka to Singapore, privatization is on the move.
Something new had been born. Its name was popular capitalism.
Popular capitalism is nothing less than a crusade to enfranchise the many in the economic life of the nation. We conservatives are returning power to the people. That is the way to one nation, one people.
Political means, are you right or you left? Or it means, are you blue or you're green or whatever it is. And so it has already a kind of a negative or anyway, not a human face. And I can't change the word, but I think, how can you change it? How can you, maybe you have to go and say, instead of use the word, which is a problem with so many keywords, say what you mean.
Some of the greatest changes to the globalizing world are being written in the language of architecture and urbanism. So there has to be a chance that we know something about it. And I'm sure that we, more than the 28-year-old McKinsey consultant who's making most of the global decisions, I'm sure that we know. So without leaving behind our fundamental forms of education, trying to bring those along to think about another kind of form making which gets us closer to that, and also changing narratives, understanding what makes changes contagious in persuasions and in discrepant messages and so on. It seems to me that there isn't any chance that a spatial change we want to make is going to be made unless we can not only design the thing, but design the advent of that idea into culture.
Something that I learned during this year is storytelling. Storytelling. The risk of a technocratic government is that in the way you communicate, you easily fall into a too specialized discourse, too technical, too difficult to understand, too detailed. You miss the point, and you should make a story.
Okay, so this studio is called Quarantine 2, which follows up on a previous studio that we ran last semester called Quarantine. My name's Rodney Eggleston, and I'll be running the studio with Julian Canterbury and Anne-Laure Cavigno from March studio here in North Melbourne. So something to note is that you won't be going to RMIT, you'll be coming here to us. What is Quarantine Studio? So effectively it's at Point Nepean National Park, which for those who don't know, Point Nepean is at the end of the peninsula, just past Sorrento and Portsea down here, near the Heads. It's a small strip of land that was only relatively recently became accessible to the public. It's a national park, and it was also the site of the original quarantine station back in the day when the ships came through the Heads. People were quarantined here and recovered or died from the illnesses that they were bringing in. We thought it's a really interesting opportunity to look at a piece of land that is completely, I wouldn't say underdeveloped, but has the opportunity to have ecotourism, has the opportunity to be taken its history into the next kind of iteration. There's been master planning to date. There's a 2010 master plan and a 2017 master plan. And since then, not a lot's been implemented. There's been a lot of money spent on design, but not a lot of built outcomes. So we're really interested in that. The land is very important land, obviously, for Aboriginal communities. And hopefully this year we'll be lucky enough to embark on an Indigenous on-country immersion trip that Christine Phillips has been organising. This was planned on, as you can see down here, Saturday the 14th of February to the 15th of February. That, of course, was the circuit breaker lockdown that we had. So there still might be an opportunity to be involved in this, and I think it'll be a first kind of served basis. We'll go through hopefully that, and then we'll also then start looking at some non-Indigenous heritage to the site, the quarantine station itself, these kind of hospital buildings, through to the fortification and the forts that pop up and down along the peninsula. That's Anne-Laure and Julian. We'll be doing classes together or separately. It'll be a kind of mix of what the class is about at the time. Here we are standing on top of Fort Cheviot. The forts are pretty interesting structures in themselves, and for example, the Fort Nepean fired the first shot, I should say, in the First World War. So there's incredible history there. These structures, some of them are in better condition than others. Obviously, we're interested in this kind of military architecture. We'll be reading Paul Virilio's Bunker Archaeology to understand these structures and the way in which they relate to the landscape and also the water beyond these kind of objects on the horizon line, which we find quite fascinating. And this sense of the horizon, and as a result, we'll be delving into contempt and Casamento. There's the opportunity to look at some of the quarantine facilities as well, the way in which they used to fumigate to evoke some notion of tectonic. We'll be taking the hospital buildings and other buildings, and we'll be trying to draw them, trying to record them. We've got already a pretty good archive of buildings modelled and drawn from the previous studio, but we'd really like to extend upon that and get a collection of these structures drawn so that we can begin to propose new usages to them. We've been scanning the structures to date as well. So this is a scan of one of the forts with all the moona trees around it, and we'll continue to do that during this studio. We'll continue to go around and capture these buildings, and we'll be asking the students to then 3D model. So we're encouraging students that are interested in learning how to model and interested in, not afraid of technology, not afraid of kind of quite heavy point clouds and models. There's also a LiDAR scan that we have of the whole peninsula. That's a really good way of beginning to investigate different sites and look at where the opportunities might be. This is the old firing range, as you can see, and using the scanning as a way of remapping a site that is relatively unsurveyed due to unexploded ordnance. Harold Holt died off Cheviot Beach, and he was one of Australia's prime ministers at the time. This was a proposal from Robin Boyd to create a memorial, but also to create this incredible protected swimming pool off the back of Cheviot there. And it was this image that really made us start thinking about what we might be able to do down there. This is one of our projects. We're interested in how we might take a temporary structure and then begin to attach it to parts of the forts or parts of the hospital buildings that are there. And running through some images now from last year's studio, you'll get this sense of these temporal structures that begin to respond to the site that's there. So very much about creating the opportunity to have new programs there, be it accommodation or be it a marketplace or some bars, whatever. So these are the kind of structures that came out of last year's studio in an attempt to really unpack the opportunity that these sites might have. So one of the briefs was to model up Fort Pierce and then create a short stay accommodation that could be brought in and taken away relatively easily. So we'll be churning through a few projects quite quickly and early on. We'll be asking students to really move quite quickly with the work that they're doing in a way that gives them the opportunity to quite early on, before mid-semester, have the arsenal to be able to say, okay, I want to take 1 or 2 or 3 buildings and work them up. These are just some more projects. This one's a great one from Michael, the marketplace, using the structure of the building that's there, but sort of stripping it out and beginning to rework it in a way that gives ultimate flexibility. After that, after the prescribed sites, you might find that you want to move on to a different part of the quarantine station, which is fine. So some of the students did that and sort of spread their wings and created all sorts of structures and opportunities across the site, which was excellent. I should also mention that we'll be spending a night down near quarantine, so there will be a cost involved with that. I think if you allow $100 or $200, that should be fine. It'd be great if students can drive. I understand not everyone does, so we can always organise buses for site visits. There will be group work. We're going to scan in groups this year. We didn't really have the opportunity to do it last year due to lockdown, but hopefully this year we will be able to do so. And one last thing to mention, I think I've already mentioned it, but it'll be here at our studio in North Melbourne, and it'll be Mondays and Thursdays from about 5 o'clock. It'll be an intensive studio early on to get as many of these short, sharp projects out as possible, and then we'll be front-ending mid-semester so that we can finish off a couple of weeks earlier than everyone else. Thanks very much. See you later. Bye.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Semester 1 RMIT Bachelor Design Studio. I'm Peter Corcolis and my colleague Dev Mistry. We're taking the studio in the first semester, and we're from Studio Lo MK, our practice. The studio will be held on Mondays and Thursdays between 6 and 9 p.m. The studio is based on, and this is a quick overview, the studio is based on deploying the theory of critical regionalism as a basis to tackle the development of the Melbourne Docklands. And also we'll be calling on some key other texts that have been theoretical texts that have been written, in particular Robin Boyd's The Australian Ugliness. And we will draw on a number of sources, which you'll see all these faces on the right-hand side of the poster, of which we consider to be good references and clear exponents of critical regionalism. And I hope that during the course of the semester, you'll take time to review. Together, we will do it together, a review, and hopefully see inspiration from these particular design and architectural sources. So I'll pass on to my colleague Dev, who'll just describe the site. And yeah, Dev, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, so the site we've chosen is in the Docklands, and it's sort of north part of Docklands, facing sort of North Melbourne, the freeway, the freeway that runs over the Balti Bridge. And we're going to look at that from a critical regionalism point of view. Now, you'll have time to look at the poster and understand what we're going to do in the studio. But what we want to do is analyze the urban grain of the existing city and the context, and how this piece of land could be stitched back into the cityscape. Sorry, I'm just getting back. So these are some of the photos of the site. This is from North Melbourne Station, which shows you the context, which is North Melbourne to the left and the CBD in the background. And then as you move around, you'll see the Docklands. You see the kind of development that's happened over the last 20 years. And the questions we're going to ask is this appropriate? Is it right? Is it feasible? Could it be done better? And we just want to sort of explore the idea of cities and what Australian cities or Melbourne could be. And as part of that sort of the conversation, what we want to do is to sort of start analysing not only Docklands, but the CBD and places around the city, and understand why things work and what don't work. And we want to explore these ideas and explore through sketches, through diagrams, and sort of graphically representing what's happening, and then even use photography to photograph streetscape, etc. And the sketching is going to be quite important in terms of sort of recording what you see and what you learn. And they don't have to be pristine sketches, and the idea is to get the ideas and sort of information down. So you go from the macro, like this sketch here, which is like really figure ground kind of sketches, to a bit more detailed analysis around materiality, scale, form, and just understanding how pieces of the puzzle of this urban grain can be brought together. And again, here's an example of a master plan that somebody's put together, where it's like a railway line context. You've got the new fabric and the old fabric coming together, and we will explore what that has to happen. And the way we're going to do it is in the first part of the studio will be to create a model, a large master plan model, which we'll look at, analyze, and that's what we will be putting our drawings and sort of our explorations into.
Yeah, can I just interrupt just one moment? And if you like, all the deliverables that Dev just talked about, or the sketching, photography and master planning, that in the first 6 to 7 weeks is going to be done as a collective studio. And what we'll endeavour to do by the end of that 6-week period, we would have built a massing model and based on a master plan that the studio has developed collectively. And then after that, and I'll let Dev explain a little bit. So we'll go into the individual.
We're conscious that we don't want to make this video long, so we'll explore the design of individual buildings through plans, sections, elevations, and we will do exploratory models of our individual site, that individual projects that will be put into the context of the bigger model. And then finally, what we'll want to do is that those ideas and the explorations will become a physical model that we will put into the larger context of the master plan model.
That's great. Yeah, and thank you. And we look forward to working with all of you, and we're all learning together. And I hope that you'll enjoy the collective plus the individual emphasis of the studio. So thank you very much for this opportunity to present.
Thank you from us. Yeah, thank you.
CARE is led by myself, Stephanie Parnas, along with Nicola Cortese and Lauren Crockett. CARE will run on Monday and Thursday evenings from 6 to 9 p.m. CARE will look at how existing structures and infrastructures can be reshaped to support new notions and spatial practices of care. CARE is concerned with the different relationships required for the effective functioning of our society. CARE looks from the scale of the human and the way that architects can design with a diverse user group in mind, to the building and the ongoing maintenance needed to upkeep it as a public asset, to the way that collectives organise and enact change on the built environment, to the relationship with country and ongoing reciprocity on the land on which we live and work. CARE is focused on the translation of theory into radical new formal outcomes. CARE encourages students to look outside of architecture.
So how will CARE work? The first part of the semester will be allocated to a series of short, sharp design, research and critique esquisses, and these will be split across 3 diverse but linked topics. And then post mid-semester, you'll be given the autonomy in deciding which line of inquiry you'd like to pursue, and you'll use the same design methodology as you've learnt earlier in the semester to develop your project. This design methodology will be split into 3 parts. So there'll be research, which will include data collection, representation, analysing type and writing, and then design, which is form finding, both analogue and digital, and materials, and then critique, which encompasses negotiation, critical thinking, and curatorial practice with regards to both your work and your peers. And then these smaller esquisses will lead to your final project, which will be designed at Siteworks in Brunswick.
The following are some key references that start to unpack the multitude of ways that architects can approach an act of care. So the first is the East Pilbara Art Centre, which is a gallery and workspace for Indigenous art collective Martamili artists. The architects took the original brief and asked instead what the community actually needed, which wasn't an architectural monument, but space to work that was protected from the harsh climatic conditions of the Pilbara Desert. They designed a large second skin in the form of an industrial shed that tripled the area of the original brief. Spatial Agency is a joint research project between Tatiana Snyder and Jeremy Till, with the tagline, Other Ways of Doing Architecture. It is a catalogue of architectural movements, precedents and practices that has presented alternate modes of acting as both individuals and collectives in the built environment. Arakawa and Madeline Ginn's lifelong practice was based on the relationship between the human body and the way that it inhabits space. Throughout all of their built proposals, they also provided meditations and instructions for users to enact that over time have resulted in countless people participating in a kind of collective choreography across their sites. CARE will prompt eco-centric thought around how architects might encourage a collective attitude towards caring for our natural world. Ice Watch by Oliver Lassen displaces glaciers within the artificial context of a public square, inflicting a sense of urgency amongst community towards the current climate crisis through the tangible experience of melting glaciers. CARE is interested in the work by Gordon Matter Clark as a reminder that a building is composed of material matter and that architecture is part of a natural system, not separate from it. We are interested in exploring material histories and reframing thought to consider whole life systems and circular economies.
The importance of care was explored in Home Economics, which was an exhibition curated by Jack Self, Shumi Bose and Finn Williams, where a series of interventions and alterations to typical domestic objects and settings highlighted the inequalities between care and capitalism. This project looks to the basement of the Barcelona Pavilion and is an intervention done by Andres Jack, who is an architect And he looked to the basement where all the important objects that assist in the day-to-day maintenance of the building sit. And these objects were put on display as a phantom to attract the attention of those who visit, almost more so than the building itself.
So just to give a bit more context on who we are, Lauren, Nicola and I co-founded Caliper Journal back in 2017. We co-led the design elective proof at RMIT in semester 1 and 2 last year. And within architectural practice, I'm at John Model Architects, Nicola is working at JCB and Lauren at Sibylline Architecture. There's been 8 issues of Caliper Journal to date, and the studio will harness the tools of writing and editing to develop critical thinking skills and to help build a clear position on design ideas and discourse. Here is some select content from Series 1 and some of the affiliated launch events we've hosted pre-COVID. Series 2 is well underway with the new student editorial group that began in early 2020. And there's an opportunity to cross-pollinate future issues with projects within the studio, which will be encouraging throughout the semester. So as Steph mentioned, CARE is underpinned by the last 2 semesters of work completed in the RMIT Architecture Elective Proof, which produced an incredible body of work upon which CARE students can reference. So this diagram and contents page by Yuchen Gao perfectly encapsulates what we were asking of the students in Proof. It was a chance to situate yourself and your beliefs within the world around you. So you can see from Yuchen's mind map that this exploration occurs at a range of scales, from personal objects, clothing and artifacts, to public spaces, private institutions, to cities, countries, and then right up to a planetary scale. So it might sound like a lot to digest, but the purpose of this studio is to be explorative at the start and then specific at the end. The elective was supported by the voices of people operating within the public sphere who have invaluable knowledge and experiences to share. So we'll similarly program public talks into the second half of the CARE semester. So CARE runs on Monday nights and Thursday nights from 6 till 9 p.m. Thank you.
Control Zoo, or Edit Undo. My name is Jess Simons and the studio that I'll be running this semester is called Control Zoo. I'm currently employed with ARM Architecture and my background is in large-scale public projects, including hospitals, universities, secondary and primary schools, and landscape-based projects within the public realm. I have a particular interest within the public realm, civic gestures, and re-evaluating or redefining architectural design strategies to achieve this. I'm interested in questioning the definition of the civic gesture. Has the traditional civic centre had its day? Is the public library a dated format? Through this studio, we will seek to investigate alternative approaches to this typology using the Melbourne Zoo as a substrate for experimentation. This studio is an industry partner project and therefore there will be the opportunity for real-life client presentations, a real brief and a real site. But it's about more than that. It's about interrogating what has come before to define a new step. It is about investigating the agency of architecture. Studios will run Mondays and Thursdays, 6:30 till 9:30. Although people have kept wild animals for thousands of years, those collections have not always resembled modern zoos. The first zoos were created as private collections by the wealthy to show their power. These private collections were called menageries. Society outdated this concept a long time ago, but there's still a widespread view on what the zoo should look like. Some look like this, some look like this. But what we do won't really look like either. We'll work, especially not the Joe Exotic, we will work around the aspiration of a place for animals to thrive, not simply survive. Your final outcomes will concern themselves with redefining a typology rather than being too concerned with the brief or the client. These are the parameters in which to test a hypothesis. Throughout the first part of the semester, students will engage in a series of design esquisses to provoke short, sharp design responses. There will also be some small-scale projects that relate back to the brief. Students will observe, analyse, interrogate and critique. They will deconstruct, reconstruct, then throw it all at the wall and start again. And again. Prior to the mid-sem crit, these tasks will be undertaken as pairs, speed dating style. New week, new partner. After the feedback from mid-semester, we'll dive headfirst into a final brief. By that time, students will be armed with an arsenal of small projects. Pick your weapons. You can choose what you take forward, what strategies, what representational styles. In the first half of the semester, we'll use mapping and analysis to inform our responses. We'll present our responses as both our own, but also as someone else. We'll not discard everything we know about zoos. There will be a careful selection process as we curate what is of value to bring forward and then leave the rest behind. It'll be a process of taking something and turning it into something else. There'll be some dirty scripting thrown in along the way. If you know how to use Grasshopper, that's great. If you don't, it might be even better. It won't be about being clever. It will be to disable you. Sometimes you need to take a step back and have a good look at the mess before you can think about how to put it all together. The outcomes of this experimentation shouldn't look like architecture straight away. You might see remnants though. A hint at what once was might lead to what's coming next. We will negotiate the site, the context, the brief, and the aspiration for the project. But at the end, sometimes it's not really about the architectural form, and it's definitely not about the animals. It's about challenging a way of thinking and what is assumed to be right. It's about questioning those current techniques. We'll question current thinking. We will seek to unzoo. We will define the next step in a lineage. We'll be concerned with the agency of architecture, or lack thereof. The best way to find out what any of this means is just to dive in head first. Control Zoo, led by Jess Simons, Mondays and Thursdays, 6:30 till 9:30.
Hi everybody, I'm Callum Fraser from Ellenberg Fraser, and I'd like to introduce you to our first studio at RMIT, run by myself, Matthew Stanley, and Alexander Jackson from Ellenberg Fraser. We'll be looking at laneways, landscapes, and towers. At Ellenberg Fraser, we believe that architecture must come out of the collective heritage of its place. This is a dynamic view of heritage, is routed in definitions of landscape and projected into the future beyond the framework of important buildings.
The purpose of the studio is to reimagine a hypothetical past Melbourne, taking ownership over its demolished buildings and speculating on their future. The studio will speculate on what was and what is important to the people of Melbourne and the landscape that preceded it, and seek to understand how its restructuring could be reflected in the form of a new mixed-use precinct.
The studio will be run from our offices at 160 Queen Street, Level 1, Melbourne. Over the 12 weeks, we'll be having 6 exercises, the first of which will be looking at the histories of Melbourne, and in particular, demolished buildings. We'll be asking you to read 2 books, 1, Bear Brast, and 2, A City Lost and Found.
We want to share with you our understanding of the city and all of its forms, and have some fun with some structures that disobey our previous best expectations of how they should behave. So we'd like to look at the semester as an open experiment into the function of collective memory and test our projections of towers into a city that may always have been. Because Melbourne is very much a place like that. It's a place that affords many positions or vantage points for architectural speculation. Laneways, landscapes, and towers.
So that's the end of our ballot presentations. Ballot forms are now open, and make sure you submit before 1 p.m. tomorrow. Please contact Christine and myself if you have any issues regarding design studios, and we wish you all the best this semester.